The wash cut through the land like a scar that never healed. Most of the year it lay dry, a shallow channel of pale sand and rounded stones, its banks sloped and fragile. But when rain came, sudden and violent, it transformed quickly, pulling water from distant hills and carrying it through the low ground with force that reshaped everything. The coyote waited there. He stood just below the lip of the wash, body angled to catch whatever breeze still moved, ears high and still. His fur was thin now, patchy in places where heat and scarcity had taken their toll. Dust clung to his legs, turning pale hair dull and grey. The wash was empty. No dampness clung to its base. No darkened sand marked recent flow. The stones lay dry and warm, holding heat they should have released by now. The water was late, or gone. The coyote lowered his head and sniffed. Nothing rose, no cool scent, no mineral sharpness that followed runoff. Only dust, old vegetation, and the faint trace of animals that had passed earlier and moved on when the wash failed to change. This place had worked before. The coyote remembered that. Not as image, but as pattern. Rain upstream, distant thunder, the sound of water arriving suddenly in the night. With it came insects, frogs, rodents flushed from cover. Opportunity compressed into narrow time. He had learned to wait here. Tonight, he waited again. The sky remained clear. Clouds gathered briefly far to the west, rising and dissolving without commitment. Wind carried no moisture. The air stayed heavy, refusing to lift scent or sound in ways that signaled change. The coyote sat, not curled, alert. Waiting cost less energy than searching ground that offered no information. Movement without signal burned calories faster than it returned them. Time stretched. Shadows lengthened along the wash walls as the sun dropped lower, but the temperature did not follow. Heat lingered in sand and stone, releasing slowly, reluctantly. The wash did not speak. No vibration travelled through ground. No sudden chill touched the air. The wash remained a shape without function. The coyote shifted position slightly, stepping down into the channel itself. Sand slid underfoot, dry and loose, forcing small corrections in balance. He walked a short distance along the bottom, nose close to ground, confirming absence rather than searching for presence. Tracks crossed the wash. Old. Deer? A small herd had passed earlier, hooves pressing shallow marks that collapsed at the edges almost immediately. They had not lingered. They had moved on. So had everything else. The coyote climbed back to the bank and stood again, scanning the horizon. Waiting had always been a calculated risk here. If water arrived, it arrived suddenly. If it did not, time was simply lost. Tonight, time was passing without return. The coyote remained. Not from optimism, from habit. This wash had shaped his routes, his timing, his survival more than once. Leaving too early had cost him opportunity in the past. Staying too long would cost him now. The problem was knowing which had changed. The light faded further. Still no water. Still no signal upstream. The wash lay quiet, a memory carved into land that no longer fulfilled its role. The coyote waited until darkness approached, ears catching every distant sound that did not matter, nose tasting air that carried nothing new. The water never returned. And the coyote, standing at the edge of a channel that no longer decided anything, began to understand that this season would not be measured by patience rewarded, but by how long one could afford to wait before memory became a liability instead of guidance. Night arrived without relief. The heat eased only slightly, draining from the sand at a pace too slow to matter. The wash cooled unevenly, stones holding warmth longer than the soil between them, creating patches of air that shifted and distorted scent instead of carrying it cleanly. The coyote remained near the bank. He did not sleep. Sleep came only after water or food confirmed the night would repay it. Tonight offered neither. Sound changed first. Insects began to move again, not in abundance, but enough to fill the silence with thin, irregular noise. Somewhere upstream, a night bird called once and stopped. Nothing echoed. The wash stayed dry. The Coyote descended again, this time farther along the channel. Moonlight reached the bottom unevenly, illuminating some stones while leaving others in darkness that hid depth and distance. He walked carefully, placing paws where footing felt stable, avoiding loose gravel that betrayed movement. A shape moved ahead. Not prey. Another coyote, smaller, younger. It stood briefly on the opposite bank, body angled sideways, watching without approaching. Its presence did not signal opportunity, only pressure. Washes without water drew animals the same way dry wells did, not because they offered resources, but because they had once done so. The two coyotes held position. No sound passed between them, no display followed. Energy was too scarce for that. The younger one moved on first, trotting along the wash and disappearing into darkness. It did not look back. Whatever it had hoped to find here, it had already confirmed was absent. The older coyote remained. He lifted his head and tested the air again. Still nothing. No cooling breeze, no scent of damp earth, no chemical sharpness that meant water had touched rock somewhere above. Instead, another smell drifted in. Livestock. Faint. Old. It carried the dry, sweet note of manure baked into soil, mixed with dust and something metallic. A fence lay somewhere nearby, though not close enough to see. That mattered. Fences changed water. They redirected flow, blocked channels, trapped runoff behind berms and tanks meant for animals that did not travel on instinct. Washes below them waited for water that never arrived. The coyote followed the scent uphill briefly, climbing out of the wash and onto firmer ground. From there, he could see farther, low shapes against the horizon, straight lines where land had been reshaped without regard for how water once moved. The wash ended blindly against that alteration. It had not failed naturally. It had been interrupted. The coyote stood still for a long time. Below him, the channel waited uselessly, its shape intact but its function removed. Animals would continue to visit it out of habit until memory faded or hunger forced adaptation. He would not wait much longer. Movement began again around the wash, not prey, but competitors. A fox passed through quickly, nose low, tail stiff, not stopping. A pair of ravens crossed overhead without calling, uninterested. The absence was now common knowledge. The coyote returned to the wash's edge one last time and stood facing upstream. He listened not for water, but for confirmation that it would not come. The silence answered. This night would not change. Waiting here would not improve odds. The wash no longer decided. The coyote turned away from it and moved into darkness along a different line. Not following memory, but following possibility, thin as it was. Behind him, the wash lay unchanged, dry and quiet, a channel that still looked like it could carry life, but no longer did. And the coyote, leaving it at last, carried with him the cost of waiting too long, in a place that had already lost its purpose, knowing that survival now depended on learning which absences could be abandoned and which still deserved patience before becoming traps. The ground rose gradually away from the wash. Not enough to strain the legs, but enough to change what the coyote could read. Sand gave way to firmer soil scattered with stones that held heat differently, releasing it faster once night deepened. His paws moved more confidently here, though confidence did not mean advantage. The smell strengthened. Livestock again, closer now. Cattle, maybe goats. The scent layered heavily over dust and old grass, telling of animals that stayed rather than passed through, animals that depended on fixed water rather than searching for it. The coyote slowed. Fixed water drew attention, not only from predators, but from people. He crested a low rise and stopped. Below lay a shallow basin that should have fed the wash during storms. Instead of a natural channel, the basin had been reshaped. An earthen berm cut across it, low but deliberate, holding back what little runoff arrived. Behind it sat a stock tank, metal, round, half filled with stagnant water that reflected moonlight dully. The water was here, not moving, not shared. The coyote watched from a distance. Cattle stood near the tank, heavy shapes barely shifting, their presence compressing ground into something hard and bare. The soil around the water was churned and dead, nothing growing there anymore. Paths radiated outward like cracks, each leading nowhere useful. This water did not travel. It stayed. And because it stayed, nothing downstream received what it once depended on. The wash below lay dry because this place existed. The coyote did not approach. Dogs might be present. Lights, sudden noise. Even without them, cattle were unpredictable at close range, and people often followed where their animals were kept. He stayed in shadow and watched instead. The tank would draw rodents eventually, insects, maybe birds, but it would also draw competition, foxes, raccoons, feral dogs, and it would concentrate risk. One mistake near fixed water ended everything quickly. The coyote turned his head and looked back toward the wash. From here, it was just a dark line cutting through lighter ground, its shape still readable but irrelevant. Water had chosen a different container. The old channel had been bypassed. The problem was not that rain had failed, it was that rain had been intercepted. The coyote shifted his weight and stepped back from the ridge. He would not circle the tank tonight. Instead, he angled away, following the fence line briefly, not close enough to touch, but near enough to read where it guided movement. Fences funneled animals, creating accidental crossings and pressure points that sometimes produced opportunity without requiring direct confrontation. This was different hunting, less patient, more opportunistic. The coyote moved steadily now, no longer stopping to wait for signals that would not come. His route bent around human structures, avoiding open ground where sound carried too cleanly. The night deepened. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and stopped. The sound marked territory rather than pursuit. The coyote continued on. The wash was no longer part of his map. Not tonight. Not this season. Behind him, water sat still in metal and dirt, denied movement by design. Downstream, the channel waited in silence for a return that would not arrive as long as flow was held elsewhere. The coyote did not blame the land, he blamed delay. Waiting had cost him time he could not recover, but leaving now preserved what mattered: mobility, adaptability, the ability to learn faster than the environment changed again. He moved into terrain where water, if it existed, would be temporary and unguarded, small seeps, shaded pockets, places that still behaved unpredictably enough to avoid ownership. The wash faded into darkness behind him, and with it faded the assumption that old routes still led to function, replaced by the understanding that survival here no longer depended on knowing where water used to go, but on reading where it was being quietly taken, held and removed from the systems that once made waiting worthwhile. The night did not improve. It settled into itself, cooling the air just enough to make movement easier, but offering nothing in return. The coyote travelled without hurry now, his pace even, no longer broken by pauses to listen for a signal that had already proven absent. The land changed gradually. Low ground gave way to broken rises and shallow cuts where shade lingered longer and moisture sometimes hid without announcing itself. These places did not promise water. They offered chance, thin, inconsistent, but unclaimed. The coyote tested one such cut. The soil was cool beneath the surface, holding faint dampness where rock trapped what little seepage remained. No pool formed, no flow followed. But insects gathered there, and insects meant movement, and movement meant opportunity. He stopped and listened. This time, the silence felt different. Not empty, unclaimed. Far behind him, the wash lay unchanged. By now, even memory of it had softened, not erased, but repositioned. It no longer sat at the centre of his roots. It became a place to pass near, not to wait in. The coyote lowered himself briefly and rested, not sleeping, resetting. Breath slowed. Muscles loosened just enough to shed tension accumulated through indecision. Hunger remained, but it no longer pressed urgently. Urgency had been spent at the wash. Before dawn, he moved again. The eastern sky lightened slowly, revealing a landscape that did not pretend to be what it once was. Fences cut across distance. Tanks replaced flow. Shadows marked ownership as clearly as scent. The Coyote followed none of it directly. He angled instead through spaces between control, places too small or inconvenient to manage, where water appeared briefly and disappeared again before being claimed. A lizard darted across stone. He did not pursue. Energy mattered. The season was not about abundance. It was about selection, which efforts to make, which habits to abandon. As light grew, he reached higher ground and paused once more, looking back toward where the wash would be if distance had not already diluted it. Nothing drew his attention there. That was the final answer. The wash had not failed loudly. It had not dried in crisis. It had simply been bypassed quietly, leaving behind a structure that still looked useful but no longer decided anything. The Coyote turned away without ceremony. He carried no loss except time, and time, unlike water, could still be redirected. By the time the sun cleared the horizon fully, he was already moving through terrain that demanded alertness rather than memory, adaptation rather than patience. The water had never returned, but neither would he. And in that decision, leaving a place that still looked right, but no longer worked, the Coyote preserved the one advantage that remained reliable in a landscape reshaped by quiet intervention. The ability to move on before waiting became another form of starvation.